Hello, everyone. This is Miss Holden, and I'm going to go ahead and review this political cartoon as a guide for one that you are going to be doing later. Once I get through with this one, if you scroll down to the document, you're going to be doing the same thing to this document down here on your own, but I'm going to model for you what it is you should be doing as you analyze a political cartoon. So this political cartoon, you need to have a little bit of background information for it. So the first thing you should always look for when you're looking for a political cartoon or any primary source in general is looking for what is it saying, what hints or clues can you have within the document. So the first thing we should look at here is this guy, President Johnson. President Johnson, he was put in a special situation because, as we talked about from our last unit, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And Johnson was Lincoln's vice president. And Lincoln and Johnson really didn't have a lot of the same reviews in regards to how Reconstruction should look. Um, and that primarily has to do with the fact that Andrew Johnson, he is a Southerner from Tennessee. So he held onto a lot of the racist beliefs that the Southern um, Confederacy have. Then some other things that you should look at when you're analyzing this cartoon is this idea of veto. And we've talked a little bit about what a veto is. Veto, remember, is when the president has the ability to either approve or disapprove laws passed by Congress. We looked at that when we looked at the separation of powers that exists under the Constitution. Johnson did not get along with a lot of members of Congress during this time because he himself, remember, is leaning more towards Southern racism and leniency amongst the South, where a lot of the Congress during this time were radical Republicans who really wanted to go into the South and change its society following the Civil War. All right, other things that you should be looking for when you look at this document. One of the things that gets passed during Reconstruction is called the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau, it was an organization to help freed slaves and poor people of the South following the Civil War. Because remember, you have many slaves that have been emancipated, they have no jobs, they have no place to live, along with many poor people within the South as well, that their livelihoods were destroyed during the Civil War. So the Freedmen's Bureau, it's an organization that was put together that was going to come into the South and to help these people put their lives back together and give them a sense of direction within the country. Now, if you look here at this thing that Johnson is kicking, this is actually, it's called a bureau, and a bureau is like a dresser or an armoire or a cabinet, some might say. And he's using this as like a play on words, the author of this political cartoon, to show that Johnson is kicking the Freedmen's Bureau down the steps. You can kind of see the words freedmen, and you can see little black people jumping out of the bureau. And that is because he is not wanting to help the Congress in this endeavor to try to have the Freedmen's Bureau take on a more prominent role within the South and putting it back together. So when we go to answer the questions, you always want to look at all of these things here first prior to even answering the questions. So now that we've looked at examples of analyzing the document, now we can go back through and answer the questions. So the man in the image, obviously we know, is Andrew Johnson. What is he doing? He's kicking the Freedmen's Bureau down the steps, and he's doing that by vetoing the ability for the Freedmen's Bureau to continue on helping African Americans that were newly freed under emancipation in the Civil War, along with poor whites, even in this case as well. How is he using the veto, refusing to approve laws? He is using his powers under his ability, under separation of powers. Remember, the president has the veto ability to pass or to veto or disprove laws from the Congress. And he does that by vetoing and kicking the Freedmen's Bureau down. Now, the other part of this that needs to come into play is you have something that ends up happening, and it has to do with Johnson and his relationship with people in Congress during this time. Remember, I said that many people in Congress were radical Republicans. They were wanting the South to pay for what they had done during the Civil War. Obviously, we said as Johnson being a person from Tennessee, he didn't necessarily agree with punishing the South. And we also remember talked about that Johnson didn't have the ability to appoint his own cabinet members because he gains them from Abraham Lincoln because he was not voted into office. He just had all of Lincoln's own staff when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Now, when you go through and when we look at the reasons, Andrew Johnson was going to be the first president who's actually going to be impeached. And that is because Congress, they had passed something called the Tenure of Office Act. And what that said is presidents cannot remove an official from office without getting approval from Congress. And Johnson, he starts to have arguments and disagreements with his Secretary of War. Now, remember, the Secretary of War was appointed under Lincoln. Johnson feels that him and his Secretary of War are on two different pages because his Secretary of War opposed Johnson's strategies on the South, and he thought Johnson was being too lenient on the South, not trying to punish them enough, and was really just trying to put the country back together, but not really giving the South any punishment for having seceded from the Union. So him, Johnson, and his Secretary of War, they go basically back and forth and at it, and eventually Johnson ends up firing his Secretary of War. This goes against the Tenure of Office Act, and because of that, Congress accuses Johnson of contributing to acts that were illegal because under the Tenure of Office Act, he was not allowed to fire his Secretary of War without Congress's approval. And that is how they start to get Johnson to be impeached. So for this question, do the president's actions justify Congress trying to impeach him? Explain. Based upon what I just told you, you answer the question with using evidence and your opinion. There's not a right or wrong answer for this one, but you need to be able to justify whether you think Andrew Johnson should have been impeached or whether he should not have been impeached. As I said, at the end of answering these three questions, you're going to scroll down and you're going to do the same thing for this next document that follows underneath it. Make sure you look at the document itself, look at all of the different components of it, even before you start to answer any of the questions. If you need any help, feel free to reach out to Ms. Flores, Ms. Rocco, or myself. Hope everyone's staying healthy and safe. Adios.